Hello, everybody. Greetings from Central Ohio in the Buckeye State. It's afternoon here, and whether it's day or night for you, I hope everyone is doing well and learning something today. I'm Tim O'Haver. I'm one of the volunteers with the WordCamp Kent organizing effort. And it's been great to see the response of everyone today. And our speakers have been so inspiring to hear from and to learn from. Our next talk is about understanding your website audience better. And our speaker is an expert on this subject. Stephen Morrissey is a web professional and a user experience designer. He discovered WordPress in 2010. He's the author of over 300 articles written to help nonprofits with digital marketing. And his writing includes topics on user experience, project management, inspiration, social media, and website tools. So for all of my friends in chat, please give a welcome to our speaker, Stephen Morrissey.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. First, I want to say thank you to all of the volunteers and organizers and our sponsors for WordCamp. This has been fantastic. So I know you would normally be going to different booths to check things out. So please visit our sponsors, see what they have to say, and give them some love. So as you can see right here, I'm going to be talking about personas. And I consider this to be the bedrock of content creation and design. This is the most essential thing and usually the first question I ask whenever I come into a design project. So let's jump into an overview here. So first, very briefly, just a little bit about me, dig into what a persona is, some of the initial creation steps, and then the validation, how to use these regularly, and then finally an example of what I consider to be one of the best uses of a persona, or at least knowing your audience really, really well. So with that, about me, so I made my first website in 1996 using Netscape Composer. And yes, I know that dates me a little bit, but I was trying to figure out exactly how to make this stuff called HTML. Eventually, I was able to look at the source code and figure it out. And for many years, I was, kind of as a hobbyist doing, websites. Then I read this book called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, and it really shifted my idea around, wow, you could actually make this more usable and have a focus on the end, the actual reader, the consumer of all this content. And then luckily, one of the worst, best things that ever happened to me, I was laid off and was working night shifts at a local grocery store. And they let me wear one earbud while I was stocking shelves at night. And I just started consuming all of these podcasts about this brand new thing called user experience. And I found it absolutely fascinating. And then when I started to go back to work, I was able to jump in and give it a shot. Like I said, okay, I was doing business analysis, and they said, hey, is anybody doing screen creation or journey mapping or anything like that? And the answer was no. So I just said, let me try this. And I did. And they said, well, you're actually pretty decent at this. So I started doing UX professionally in 2011, 2018. I attended my first WordCamp, and I thought, wow, this is a fantastic group of professionals, entrepreneurs, hobbyists, and can I do anything to contribute to the community? And when I thought of that, the first thing it made me think of was, oh, by the way, I love unicorns. So I was thinking of all the different things that I like to do and the wide variety of my background. And I thought, that's where the unicorn things come in, because the UX unicorn is the mythical creature that can do all of your front end, knows front end coding, back end database development, graphic design, storytelling, presentation skills, all of those types of things. So that's why I love unicorns. But, why personas? Why jump into this type of a subject? And for me, it was really around every time I started into a project, persona had to be one of the first things you had to create. And so at just about every UX job I had, I either created or updated a persona. And they were always the first critical step, because you needed to understand who you were designing for, who you were creating for, whether it was content, whether it was products, no matter what you were trying to do, it had to be something that you had to have that user in mind and really think about it. If kind of the adage is, if everybody's your audience, nobody's your audience. So how do you narrow down and figure out exactly who that audience is and make something better for them? Because very rarely are you your own customer. So what is a persona? This is my definition of one of these. It's called a fake person based on real data, and you use it as a model for content and design. So that is my definition, and I'm going to go ahead and break it down now. So a fake person, this is usually not a person that you actually know, but usually a composite of a lot of different data points. Very rarely do you have the perfect user, so to speak. So you often have to pull those different data points in and kind of create your own. Real data, this has to be based off of real data and you'll see there's a variety of different sources here, but you try to figure out all of these different data points that help you create this really accurate representation of your perfect audience member. And the model aspect of it is, this is the lens that you view all of your design through, and you need to create experiences for. So this is how whenever you're thinking about, do I like this page or do I like this article, you need to flip that around and say, does my persona X like this? So that's where this definition comes from. And so moving through into definitions here, I just wanted to start off with showing an example of a persona that I recently did for a company. And here this is for an e-commerce company that sells technical products. And as you can see, there's a couple of different aspects here. Probably the most important one is visually the priorities. And this changed based on each persona that I had. There was about 4 different personas for this company. And depending on which one that you were looking at, you saw the different priorities, what they cared about the most. So that helped you prioritize content on that particular page. So if you're showing a product detail page, okay, this one is definitely aimed more towards our technical researcher. I'm not going to be pushing education as much. I'll show a little bit about pricing because they might consider that, but they're not the ones buying this. They're usually just making a technical recommendation. And that technical recommendation was based off of the tech specs and compatibility. So, and on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a bit more of a story narrative to this persona, where you want to see kind of really what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what influences them, what are their biggest pain points. So this is, that kind of more story narrative that helps you understand what your customer, what your audience is thinking of. And when you're trying to shape and create content, you're looking at this and hoping it guides you. And honestly, just the act of actually creating this narrative helps you understand your customer that much better. So how do you create something like this? Well, let's jump into that. So for initial creation, it's mostly just like a guess. It's a really good guess. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess. So what you're going to see here is you need to start with your data. And your data should be the first thing. It shapes the persona. And when you start finding, the second point here is an important one, when you start finding greatly divergent data points that really should drive apart an aspect of what the person is looking for in terms of your content or product, that's when you might want to consider splitting the persona into 2 separate pieces and have 2 separate personas instead of just the one. So I'll use an example here of, say you have a blog about pets. And so you might want to think of splitting it up with, cats, dogs, and maybe like reptiles and other mammals or something like that. Some, not as typically popular or traditional pets, at least here in the United States. And so you might look and think of, well, maybe it's just, cat lovers versus dog lovers. Or you could flip it and say, well, maybe a casual pet owner that just says, well, this is the family pet. We love them. They're great. Versus the quite more eccentric, like, this is my, I have no children. This is my fur baby. And I love them very much. And I have a little stroller for them. And I only buy organic pet food. Maybe you want to go with those types of differences where it's a casual pet owner versus a more extreme pet owner. But that's where you would have a split in the data, and therefore you would have 2 separate personas at that point. And you want to capture only the relevant data pieces here. And so the most, for this pet owner, what type of a house do they live in? Well, that affects the types of products they might be shopping for. Do they own a car? Well, that also affects the type of products they might be interested in. What color is their hair? that doesn't matter. We don't need to worry about something like that. So, you take out some of those irrelevant data pieces. While they might be neat for your persona, oh, wow, this person has glasses. That doesn't matter if they have, what we care about is, what type of a pet person they are, not what color what color hair, or what if they wear glasses. So data data is basically the first thing you could use here. And so where can you get that data from? And so probably the first one is your personal experiences with your customers. In a lot of cases, you're dealing with a niche market, hopefully, that you at least know a little bit about. Or if you don't, you have some possible colleagues that have personal experiences with it. So this is where you could say, yourself or anybody that has regular customer contact. So for me, where I work full time, I sit right on the sales floor with technical support, customer support, and our sales team. I regularly talk with them to ask about what are the common complaints, looking at our tech support chat lines to see what are the common problems and can we address them before somebody has to go into something like that. Like, I have to contact technical support because I couldn't find the information on the website. Well, let's see if we could fix that before tying up our tech support lines. Google Analytics is also another great place. So you can see geographically where your audience is coming from. So if you are just starting your blog, may not be as helpful. But if you have a site that's been up and running and you have Google Analytics data, looking to see what time are they hitting your website, what platforms what devices are they using, and also where are they from. And to take it a step further from where they're from, you could possibly even go to the Census Bureau information and say, okay, what are the demographics there? What are the age ranges? Depending on the type of blog that you have, you can look at a lot of other types of data to really get kind of that ethnographic sense of who the audience is and where they're coming from, how many of them are. And also, finally, don't forget surveys. Surveys are great tools for gathering high-level information. So if you're just doing some of this initial gathering of data and you have, say, an email sign-up form, or maybe you have an ebook that you want to give away, one great thing is, hey, could you take this very short survey, ask a few high-level questions just to understand, gather those high-level data points of where your personas could possibly lie. And then lastly, don't forget about your colleagues. So if you have any competition, don't treat them as strictly competition and ignore them. Maybe you want to reach out to them to see what types of, do they have personas? And also, what do their audiences look like? What are their perspectives on their customers and the people, the audiences that they serve? So once you have all that data, you need to run it through a filter. And this filter is your empathy map. And this really helps you frame the data in the context of your audience. And so I'm going to show you an example of an empathy map here. So you can see here, once you kind of have those data points and you kind of have an idea of what that persona might be called, put this up on a whiteboard, or you could use a similar slide like this and just have a group discussion, either with some of your team, but oftentimes you're possibly a team of one. This is where you could possibly get some of your coworkers, because if everybody is working in this space, or some of your colleagues that are also in the blogging space, this might be a really great kind of quick thing at a meetup to say, hey, let's try to understand our customer. But walking through these questions of what influences them, what are their goals, what are the pain points and feelings, and what are the general tasks, you can see where tasks can really start to figure out, all right, if it's based around tasks, that really could drive your navigation. Feelings, that can really drive your voice and tone. Pain points, that could help you prioritize certain pieces of content or certain features higher than others, so you're answering those pain points straight away. Goals, that could really hit what the overall strategy for this whole site might be, is you're really trying to help someone achieve a goal and can really help your tagline. And influences, where can you possibly either address your audience, or how can you address your audience so that they're seeing your content and building that authentic voice for them. So after you've walked through that empathy map, technically I'd say you're ready to start using your persona. I'm going to talk about validation first, but right now you are ready. You have your initial research. So when I made that example that I had showed you, when I created that, we started using it straight away. And then it was almost 6 months later before I actually got to validate that persona, or I'm sorry, those personas. So, you get to run your initial research through that filter, the empathy map. That's great. You already have a solid thing. So start using your persona. And so hopefully you might have been using your persona, or maybe you have the extra time and you want to validate them right now. That's great. And so, elementary school math was not the only time you needed to check your work. You should probably be checking your work now. So let's jump into basically why and how to validate a persona. So your initial guess, of course, is kind of that initial story. And actually, right now, you're going to see some similar from the data gathering methods. You're going to see some similar methods, but just please know that when you're gathering that initial data, it's higher level. You're just trying to figure out, who they are and kind of what they do. Whereas this next follow-up, you're going to see some things where you're just going to drill down on another layer deeper and have some more specific questions. So for, the examples of a pet owner, you might be digging down to a lot more stuff that's like, okay, what type of pet do you have? But then, well, why do you have that pet? Or how do you view that pet? Or what types you really digging into? Well, okay, you buy moist food. Why? So hopefully you can get into that. So here's a couple of validation methods. So customer interviews. If you have an existing audience that you were able to get that initial kind of high-level overview, maybe someone will agree to do a more in-depth interview. And so whereas the surveys or high-level overviews might just take a few minutes, a lot of times these are like a half-hour interviews. And I would almost always, if you have any budget for it, offer some sort of compensation. There are a few cases where I don't really worry about that, especially with nonprofit groups or different types of things like that, where they don't have much of a budget, but you're helping them out, or maybe you don't have a budget either. A lot of times they're a lot more willing to help you because they know it's going to be for the greater good. Depending on if you have more of a business-driven one, they might not be giving up their free time as easily unless you're compensating them with at least a $20 gift card for Starbucks. Conducting A/B tests is another good way. So if you have a sticking point with one of your personas, and you're not exactly sure which way they might go, create two different types of pages with those slight variances, and then see how they perform using either Google Analytics or other types of A/B testing tools like usertesting.com, where you can just put up two different types of designs and let someone click on them. And tools like usertesting.com, you could actually put a couple of requirements around, like, okay, they have to be a pet owner, they have to be a dog owner, and they should live in the United States or in the Northeast versus the Southwest. So you can kind of narrow down exactly what that audience is, and then fine tune something, and hopefully get some new ideas around that persona and validate to say, yes, they do really care about this more. Whether for moist food versus dry food, they care if one's organic and one's not, something like that. Also, Google Analytics data. So again, digging back into it, but hopefully digging a little bit deeper with a finer tooth comb and seeing, I once did a website for a pizza shop and was able to see, hey, this is your average pizza shopper that's looking on your website. But after we've had the site up and running for a while, I was able to see that even though the pizza shop was located in the suburbs, we got a lot of traffic around 4 and 5 o'clock from downtown. By the way, I'm from Pittsburgh, so that's where I'm coming from with that. So you would see a lot of traffic coming from downtown versus up in the suburbs. So that told us, like, hey, by the way, you should be posting on social media because these people are looking for, I want to buy some pizza when I get home from work. Easy enough. And then comments and feedbacks. Of course, we know that WordPress has a commenting and feedback built right into it. Use that. If you're ask questions at the end of your blog post to say, hey, what are your favorite pet ideas? What are your favorite pet carriers? What do you like most about this organic dog food? Ask those types of questions, and hopefully you're getting some feedback on that and can further refine and validate your different personas. So again, using personas. So now that you have this tool, so as I said, just the simple act of building this, you are gaining tons of insight about your audience. So how do we actually use these more often? So I would say that anytime you're going to be creating any content, always be asking, why would the persona care about this? What would engage them? When you are posting to social media, does this group target the same groups or use the same approach? So, if you're targeting Pinterest versus LinkedIn versus Facebook or Twitter, just understanding which demographics are typically on those, possibly even TikTok now, since that's what my kids are always on. But yeah, different types of things like that where you want to see, where are the different groups based on this persona, and then how do I target those social media areas? WordPress themes and design. So are you looking to see what types of themes and design might resonate better with those types of audiences? And I'm not just saying that, to say, men versus women. I'm also talking about accessibility. So if you have an older audience, if you're over the age of 50, your eyesight starts to go, and so you maybe might want to have possibly larger fonts. Or if you are dealing with mothers of small children that might be breastfeeding, make sure you have a website that only requires use of one hand, because often the only time a mother has a break is when she's breastfeeding and one hand's tied up holding the baby. So something like that, making sure there's not a lot of typing involved, that you can only use a mouse. So making sure that you have your themes and designs really tailored around those personas. Next would be template creation. So if you have your typical blog post or page, making sure that you have the right widgets on those pages to fit those specific audiences. So if you have a more educational piece around pets versus a more idea thing around pets, you might want to have different widgets and different functionality on that page to for that particular audience, because maybe you're just trying to hit that one a little bit different to say, all right, people that are doing a lot more active with their pets and take them on vacations or take them to dog parks versus just simply walking them around the neighborhood. You might want to have different types of content pieces, in templates specifically for those personas. And then hopefully, if you're having any type of reviews, if you're not just a team of one and you have to work with other people, which a lot of us have to, it helps take away that instance where somebody says, I don't like that color blue. Well, nobody really cares what you like. We care about what our persona likes. And so it's a nice way to, I wouldn't say that explicitly, but it's a nice way to turn it around to say, well, what would Jane, the cat owner, like more, rather than what I like? So it's a nice way to simplify reviews by really turning it around and making it about your customers, your personas. And lastly, more research. So you could use your personas to hopefully see where gaps exist in your original thinking, kind of recycle them back through. So when you validate your personas, that's great. It's not a one-time thing. You should be doing that, I'd say, about at least once a year, just based off of how industries change, how culture changes, and also how technology changes as well. There might be different social media platforms you might want to be testing out, or there might be a brand new plugin that is really cool for WordPress that you might want to try to integrate. Well, let's take a look at our personas to see which ones would actually benefit from this. So yeah, social media, making sure you're using the relevant hashtags to use and remain relevant with your specific audiences. So this last one, I know Steve this morning mentioned him, and I'm going to mention him again because he's such a great person to hold up as an example of knowing your audience. But for those of you in the US, you should recognize this face immediately. Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was such an amazing part of American culture throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He was in so many of our lives and in so many of our living rooms if you kind of grew up in that era. And so Fred Rogers, I think, is a prime example of truly understanding your audience. And I don't know, I doubt he actually made personas, but it's just such a good example of him understanding that. So I would say, he had a persona. I say he does. And it's basically a child with access to television. That's really what it was. And his focus was on creating really good quality programming that helped children deal with everyday life. And through various interviews that I've heard, biopics, stories, movies, it was always around what would benefit how would children benefit from this? And, the show's design was really around, what are their concerns? So whether it was showing them the old Incredible Hulk live television show, and then showing them like, yeah, the big scary green guy is actually just a bodybuilder, and he's actually really nice, Lou Ferrigno, and he's just wearing green paint. So you don't have to be scared of him. It's really just pretend. It's make-believe, just like in the land of make-believe. So, his approach to that was really helping children understand exactly where their fears were coming from. And he actually at one point tried different personas. He actually walked away from his television show for children and did one more for young adults. And it kind of flopped. It really didn't match what he really understood. I mean, it was still the same Mr. Rogers, but his tone, his delivery, his very deliberate speaking and use of silence didn't resonate as well with the older audience. So he kind of actually went back to doing just for children. But because the reason why, he understood that even though his audience didn't necessarily change, but the times certainly had changed. So he realized there were still more things to talk about. And so while you might be blogging about a particular thing, going back to your, reevaluate your persona and say, hey, did anything really change? So especially if you like walk away from your pet blog and you start doing a travel blog, well, maybe you want to come back to, you've found that this, maybe there's a new type of pet, or there's a new type of backpack for your dog, or there's new types of basically a feeling towards this, especially with a lot of millennials opting to own a pet than to have kids because it's just a lot easier and cheaper. Well, hey, maybe, after not doing this for 10 years, you come back and actually talk about why this change in culture happened. So I just want to recap here. So remember that a persona, it's a fake person based on real data, and you use it for design. Next, you start with educated guesses and you filter them through that empathy map. And then once you start, and then you can start using it. That's the great part. And, right after that, I would say either after you start using it, that's great. Hopefully you'll start seeing the value of it and maybe want to refine it, possibly find some gaps in your original thinking and want to fill them back in. And at that point, validate them. And also validate on a regular basis. Don't just set it on the shelf and forget about it. Try to validate and use it as often as possible. And by use, I mean, whenever you have a design talk, make your persona the focus of your content creation and design, whether it's software, whether it's a blog post, whether it's a product, have them at the center of that. And one of the nice things I forgot to mention in terms of using personas is to possibly do what I did and actually create like something you could print out and have them printed up and stuck either in your cubicle. I know people who have framed them and put them in their offices. And just by walking by them and seeing them on a regular basis, you soon start to realize this isn't just the dog owner. This is Jane. This isn't just the cat owner. This is Phil. Okay, so you just really start to, really think about that persona as a almost as a real person, and start to incorporate them into your everyday design practices and your everyday thinking when you're creating your content. So I went hopefully as fast as possible with that. I have my my personal website there if you want to get in contact with me and find me on LinkedIn. I'm sorry, on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn, but that's my Twitter handle right there. I will be posting. I have this already uploaded to SlideShare, so I will be posting these slides out for everybody if they want to catch that. I'll be shooting it out on both on Twitter and in the Slack channel. So at this point, I'm ready for some questions. Tim, you're on mute.
Okay, I was on mute. Apologies to everyone there. Stephen, thank you for your presentation, for welcoming us into your neighborhood today to share all of this information with you. Chat is really, they love Don't Make Me Think, and they love Mr. Rogers. One question I see there is about multiple personas on one blog. Can you have multiple personas for one blog?
Absolutely. You have the persona is a tool. And so, I might own one hammer, but if all of a sudden I started doing different types of projects around the house, I might need to buy a different type of hammer. And so if you have a blog that is focused specifically on just one small, exceedingly narrow niche, you might just need one persona, and that helps you out. But the moment you want to try to be a bit more broad, so for my blog that I have personally, Church Web Strategies, it is for helping churches and nonprofits, groups that are typically very backwards with not having a lot of help. And so I know I'm talking to the small mom and pop, corner church, but then also possibly some of the mega churches that have a lot bigger, a lot more resources. So I know I could say, this is how you work. I have a persona that is just for the one person shop, but then also the communications person that also has a developer, that also has a graphic designer and an email coordinator. So, you have personas for as many things as you need and as for the audience that you are trying to reach. Again,
Thank you.
It's a tool.
Very nice. Another question from our chat channel. What are some of the common mistakes that people make when they begin doing this work?
I could think of two of them. The first is they add too much data. You add in extraneous data that doesn't really fit and isn't really used and doesn't really help you solve a problem. And at times it gets you hung up. So I don't want, as I said earlier, like what color hair does the pet person have? It doesn't really matter because you're not really, that's not a design choice. And then also I would say that having too many personas, it gets very easy. So a lot of times, especially with businesses, they usually segment out their audiences by what people's job titles are. And I ran into this at my current company. We had like 9 personas. I whittled it down to 4 because I got rid of the concept of titles, and because the title doesn't define you, who you are. That's why I said earlier, like, the pet owner that is really a lot more extreme versus not. And so having too many personas to say, well, this is my cat person, this is my dog person, this is my snake person, my reptiles, my guinea pigs, that might be too much. So maybe you scale it back to, all right, casual versus intense pet owners. And so really trying to make it a more behavior-based persona rather than focusing on titles or some other key points that you might think at first glance are important, but they actually aren't. So as I said, for my work, I have the technical researcher, the solution builder, a purchasing agent, and the non-technical requirements, because that just meant they were a government employee, needed to only buy certain types of products from us. So I instead of talking about all these different job titles, I narrowed it down to how do they behave and what are they looking for on the website.
Excellent. I'm going to rephrase this chat question a little bit, but I think it's a great question. You are an expert, and as an expert, when you're right, you're probably pretty good at knowing that you're right, having the tools to know that you're right. But if you're not an expert, Stephen, how do you know that your personas are right? What can you do?
Usually you figure out if you're right or wrong in the validation process. And also, this isn't an exclusionary tool that you only use personas to figure out how to be successful. You're also using your other types of tools such as analytics and your feedback from hopefully comments and questions, tracking engagement on social media. So you're looking at other numbers to see, all right, I think this is the right persona. I think this is the right content. They should really enjoy this. And you throw it out there. And when you hear the crickets, that's when you got to take a couple steps back and figure out, okay, was it the wrong time of day? Was it the wrong platform? Did I make wrong assumptions about this persona? Do I have to reevaluate this? And actually, I found out something that was wrong when I was doing that technical researcher persona. I showed someone a page, and it was a brand new page that I designed. I was all excited to show them this. I'm like, hey, check out all this stuff. I've got all these features and benefits for this new technical product. And the person took one look and went, I'm not going to read all that. Show me a bullet list. Just don't write me a paragraph. Show me a bullet list. I went, okay, let's back it up and reevaluate and recreate and then write that into the persona to say they don't care about education. They just want to see the tech specs.
Nice. Okay, when you and I started working on websites with Netscape Navigator back in 1996, there were some common misconceptions. Like some people thought blinking text was really cool because you could do it, right? You remember that? I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. In the world, in the realm of personas, are there common misconceptions like that?
I think some of the misconceptions might be around the how many you need, and again, it's the how many need and what the data points are. Some people feel that their audience is more diverse and they want many personas, but when you boil it down to really from a design perspective, what's going to influence them, and what's going to really matter. So like what kind of car does a pet owner have? That can influence, what products you can sell them, and might give you an idea of the types of activities, or heck, even if they even have a car. If you're living in New York and you're living in a small apartment in New York with a small dog, yeah, you might not even have a car. So your idea of taking a dog for a walk is much different than taking a dog for a walk when you live out in the rural country. So I think it's just, you might think you have a lot of segmentation where you don't. Really it is overthinking it, I have to say. It's probably one of the biggest, most misconceptions is overthinking, and just, keeping things a lot simpler. And when you run into a design problem that you can't solve using, or at least having a persona help you, that's probably when you need to reevaluate, but keep it as simple as possible with as few data points and as few personas as possible. I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions is especially when you hear about this new tool called personas, you want to start making all of these. You really don't have to.
Simplicity is always good.
Yes.
Okay, with all of your pet references, Stephen, the chat channel wants to know if you have a pet.
I have, at one point in time, I had 2 cats and 2 dogs and 2 teenage girls. So that was enough for me. Unfortunately, both my dogs have passed, but I did have, both were rescues. I have two house cats, but then I had a rescue pit bull and a rescue pug beagle mix. But yeah, those were the only pets that we had. So yeah, I have had pets, and I currently still do have 2 cats, and each daughter has a cat that they call their own.
Okay. Another question from chat. Would existing users have a different persona than new users? Should there be 2 different personas?
I definitely think so, because the familiarity with your brand and message is a lot differently. And so taking it back, from my blog about churches, someone who grew up going to church every day versus someone who would never step foot in one, vastly different types of personas. Whereas where I currently work with a tech e-commerce place, someone who is a brand new customer, there's no differentiation really needed, because they generally know, what the different types of technologies are. They know the difference between routers and switches and bridges. In terms of network devices, they already know what the differences between Cat5 cable is versus fiber optic cable. You're not really throwing them for a loop there. So, an existing user versus a current one, not that big of a deal. So that's why at my workplace, we didn't bother distinguishing that. But again, that's only because it wasn't a big factor.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Mm-hmm. This topic is so deep, so rich with details. I can't imagine that our audience is not going to want to ask more questions of you in the Slack channel. So okay. If you have more questions for Stephen, please head over to the Slack workspace and look for that help channel, and Stephen will be available to answer your questions there. If you have any feedback for us on this talk or other talks, we'd love to know what you think. From the Word Camp Kent website at the main menu, there's a feedback selection there. Just choose that, and please give us your feedback. Your participation helps us understand your persona and meeting your needs, and we would love to do that. So thank you, everyone, for now, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.